This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Thank you for being a part of Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein, longtime journalist and a mom of 3, and this is where we take the things we're experiencing as parents right to the experts for advice. Today, we're talking about one of the most important things there is: speaking and communicating clearly with friends, loved ones, really anyone. We're focusing on speech delays and disorders, which are on the rise right now, while at the same time, the number of people trained to help, speech language pathologists as they're known, those numbers are declining. So there are several reasons for the increase in kids who have delays and disorders, which we're going to get into today with our guest, who is Margie Childs. She is an SLP of more than 30 years. She is also the lead SLP at a school district in Maine, and she serves as secretary of the Maine Speech Language Hearing Association. She is so passionate about helping children and families navigate speech delays and disorders. And she's here to help if your child or a child you love has, or maybe even you just kind of suspect, a speech delay or disorder. Here's our conversation. Margie, thank you so much for talking about speech disorders with us today. And, let's just start off with this. You've been doing this for a very long time. Why are you so passionate about this topic, particularly when it comes to kids?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm incredibly passionate, partly because I have concerns about the state of Maine having a shortage of therapists to fill my own position when I retire. And I see a growing need. I work in the school systems, which I've done for over 35 years. And we see more and more issues. And the more we know we need to know more. I've learned so much as I've gone along. Speech therapy years ago was, just helping children with their sounds. And now we know that speech and language therapy encompasses all aspects of communication. And we also know how much it impacts all facets of life when a person has a problem with communicating, whether it's a social need, a vocabulary need. Most people think of us as helping with the sounds or articulation, but it really enters all parts of life functioning.
So what are the different types of speech disorders? Because, you talk about working with sound, but there are others, I think of stuttering, maybe slow to develop speech, perhaps with a younger kid. What are some of the different types of speech disorders?
Good question. Yeah, we tend to categorize the need areas when we look at overall communication and whether somebody's effective in certain areas. Of course, we look at phonology or articulation. We look at your vocabulary development. We call it semantics. Grammatical needs, whether it's talking in a telegraphic way and leaving out suffixes and prefixes and not speaking in an organized way. That would be another disorder. Of course, you can have something cognitively happening that is more global. We have a lot of students or people now that we know a lot more about how to identify and find when a student or a younger person is on the autism spectrum. That's a big part of my world, helping students with just navigating their way through being a nonverbal person and how can you effectively communicate using a device or sign language. But of course, when we're not talking about children, there's also the huge need for speech and language therapy, birth to grave, in terms of people have head injuries or strokes. And there's, many, many needs in the rehab centers and hospitals for older people. But I'm really all about looking for the early identification and making sure that we don't have people on waiting lists if there's at all a concern about any facet of their communication, whether it's stuttering or understanding language or their expressive skills.
So what kinds of trends are you seeing then, especially when it comes to early identification? You work with a lot of young kids.
Well, a trend, I think a lot of people like to think about how possibly COVID impacted the language and speech development of children. And we certainly know that low socialization impacts everyone's ability to navigate or engage with others and take care of things like problem solving and just the social skills that are needed to be successful, whether you're in the classroom or at home. And then, of course, wearing masks and having just limited time or exposure to good communication. A lot of children are on the screen a lot. We call them techie toddlers. They might be a wizard at Minecraft, but really not be able to hold a conversation. So we're seeing trends with children that have splinter skills, and they might seem very bright in some ways, but struggle to really effectively communicate their needs, whether it's because they missed out on opportunities for whatever reason in the home setting or.
I have wondered just about the masks and, especially kids who, I don't know, what would be the age coming up during the pandemic that maybe it would have been most impacted, like a 0 to 2, a 2 to 4, because so much of it is probably watching people's mouths as they're learning speech patterns.
Right. And on top of that, we had the social distancing and the isolation. So it was a multi-layered problem for having rich communication being modeled for children. Some of their main models were on a screen, and that was a necessity during the pandemic. But then when we did come back together, even speech pathologists like myself, I had to wear a mask and a shield. So it made just the work of my craft very tricky. And we did let some errors slide or time go by before we addressed things like that. And I actually had some experiences where, because we couldn't touch each other physically, I sometimes didn't realize that a child maybe had very large tonsils or missing teeth or things like that any good speech pathologist would have done a good oral motor exam when they start working with a child when you're producing sounds. But when you don't have that opportunity, and now we're moving to a lot more telehealth, which also limits the opportunity for the therapist to get in there and really be close with the child or adult that needs their speech services. So teletherapy is an excellent avenue if it's the only option, but I'm a real big promoter of in-person, hands-on work with especially younger people. It should be fun. It should be a relationship instead of just a clinical opportunity, such as when a child visits their doctor. It should be much more playful based, using literature and so, manipulatives. So
what are some of the early signs that maybe there is, a speech disorder in your child?
Okay. Well, we have milestones that we expect. And I believe anybody in the audience would understand that you would want your child to be, by the age of 1, starting to say maybe 1 or 2 words, turning to voices, engaging in a vocal way, even if it's just cooing, and moving up to babbling. So you have the stairs of moving up, of becoming more and more verbal. By the age of 2, you're putting words together. Your vocabulary is well over 50 to 200 words. The range is huge because you can look at milestones or developmental charts. But as you know, as a parent of 3, and I had 2 sons, everybody's very different. Mm-hmm. So I think the biggest thing to steer your concerns, or whether you're looking at a red flag, is if a child really just does not seem to be moving at the normal rate that their peers are. If you have the chance to compare your child to other children, that's sometimes helpful to say, oh, well, this other 3-year-old is telling me a story, but my 3-year-old is still saying 1 word at a time. Those, obviously looking for those sort of significant differences. 3 and 4-year-olds should be understandable to most people, but mainly family. And we do expect sound errors or grammar errors before the age of 4. So it's hard for me to diagnose, but I guess I would say right now, if you're in doubt, rule it out. You should definitely talk to your doctor, and your doctor can make a referral.
Well, I'll share candidly, our 5-year-olds, we're going through this process right now. And, Margie, I will say that part of me feels terrible, ashamed to admit it, but it was so cute.
Right.
All the L's or W's, and, he's our youngest. So it kind of felt like we were holding on to that little kidness, if you will. I mean, that's hardly a word, but bear with me.
Adrienne,
and then when he hit 5 and we were still with the L's were W's and the R's were a little off, we can understand him perfectly. Most people can, but it's clearly there needs maybe some guidance there. Right. So we're kind of in the middle of this process, but do you find that happens with parents, that part of it is kind of holding on to the little kid? It's cute. And we talked to our pediatrician on his 5-year-old's appointment. He's like, it's time that we could probably, early intervention is key. Exactly. So because we're hearing a little lisp, because the L's are kind of W's, we got.
And what you're describing, Adrienne, are what I would call at the age of 4 and 5 a developmental error, meaning most children developmentally don't produce L and R and SH and TH sounds quite right until they're 5 or 6. However, we do see cases where if it doesn't improve when you're prompting them or giving them a model, then maybe it's sticking too much. And you certainly at around the age of 5 know that literacy becomes a big piece of our communication. And if they can't say or produce letter sounds accurately, you don't want your child to fall behind because they're missing that component of being able to form the sounds. And classroom teachers try their best. We do a lot more there. I'm seeing in schools, teachers are understanding more about pointing to their articulators and showing children, this is how I make the TH sound if they hear an F. But I guess I wanted to point to one more thing, going back to what you asked earlier about when do you decide if something is perhaps a disorder. When a child is doing something that's not developmentally typical, such as omitting sounds altogether, like leaving out the final consonant of a word, or maybe mispronouncing vowels, that's a real red flag. Most children will almost have the melody of speech, and you can make out what they're saying, even if it's unclear, if they have the typical substitutions. But if they have atypical substitutions, here's a good example. Most children around the age of 4 or 5 are already saying the K and G sound, the K, G. But we call it fronting when they produce that with a T or a D instead. So
what does that sound like?
Coat turns into tote, and cat is tat. Well, those are high frequency sounds. They come up very commonly, much more than, say, a Z sound or a J sound in our speech. So when you have a sound said in an incorrect pattern that's not developmentally typical, because we don't expect children to make that sound error, but I do hear it quite a bit with the kids that are in my caseload, you definitely need to get them into therapy or address that, because they will be what we call unintelligible in low context. If you're sitting at a table with a child and playing with toys and they're talking about what they're doing, even if they have poor speech, we would call that high context, because you have joint attention and you're sharing the same idea together. But say a child comes up to you with some sound errors, maybe even the few that you're saying your son has, and they want to share what they got for Christmas, and it's some new Nintendo game or something with unusual words, then we would call that low context, meaning the story is out of the blue. I don't know what you're talking about. We want children to be intelligible, at least 80 to 90% of the time. That's kind of our benchmark. So if you're with your own family member that struggles to be clear more than 20% of the time, then you really want to see if you can work on that, whether it's getting formal help or a consultation.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Do you find that speech disorders show up differently or impact girls and boys at a different rate?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Statistically,
how so?
Well, statistically, males are the majority of caseloads, and it's boys that are not the first child that are typically, we know that it's second or third siblings and males. And so if I rub shoulders with a lot of speech pathologists in Maine, if I just said, how many in your caseload are males and how many are females, they would say more males. It's just what happens. Speech is a fine motor skill. And for whatever reason, I'm not going to be sexist or say that we have females have a better capability with speech and language, but that's just statistically the norms. There are some disorders, though, such as autism or cerebral palsy or something that cut across gender. And we still don't know the cause or the root cause for many of these needs. You parented 3 children the same, I'm sure, except for you might think that you held on to his cute speech, but it just is the way our brains are wired, or some children happen to have more ear infections when they're younger, perhaps.
Oh, interesting. And how would an ear infection impact speech?
They say it's like hearing underwater. So okay. I have a lot of kids that also have many appointments with the ENT because they are, the constant ear infections or needing tubes in their ears. Some eventually have their tonsils and adenoids out because just the physical structure. Speech is a physical task, but not hearing the sounds correctly would definitely contribute to not producing. We also see grammar issues and vocabulary issues sometimes when a child has very low articulation or speech, just because they have less rich opportunities to interact with people. They're not going to have the same experience as a child that has very clear speech and they're very, easy communicators. Their trajectory of learning, we know, is going to move along quicker, which is why we want to clear up speech problems earlier, as young as possible.
So it doesn't sound like there's a clear cause of speech disorders. It could be a number of different things. Could genetics in any way play a role?
Yes. When we first evaluate anybody, depending on, it doesn't matter the age, we do ask about family history. There is a connection. We know that in fluency or stuttering, that is also the case. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of meetings with parents that say, I was in speech too. And it's just not a surprise. But you can have excellent modeling in the home. Strong socioeconomics does not necessarily dictate whether a child will or will not need some form of help in speech and language. But there are factors: sleep issues, thumb sucking.
Oh, you know what? It just came to my mind. And I did think about this. My youngest, who's, he's 5, he had a binky for a really long time. And I can't help but feel like maybe, just instinct, and who, as you have alluded to, it's very hard to say what a cause could be. But That always kind of stuck with me in the back of my mind is he loved this binky. And we got it to where it was just at night and then eventually, out at night. But boy, that kind of just hit me. I wonder if that could be a factor. Sure. Yeah.
I see we have, we call it comorbid disabilities or just doubling up on needs in whether a person might possibly have attention problems. That is often the case with some of my students or people I've worked with significant speech problems. They also have ADHD. And it makes their experience of trying to remediate their issues a lot longer if they can't hold on to information like a child that focuses. Just focusing on a simple act of bearing with the speech pathologist to think about how a word is formed and shaped with your mouth. That takes quite a bit of effort and energy for a little one, especially. I often say to people that you can teach a child to correctly say the R sound or the L sound or their CH sound. But then the next big hurdle is to help them understand when in speech those sounds occur and to go and replace them, interchanging the incorrect pattern they were doing. So they're always thinking ahead and they're thinking about their tongue while they're having their thoughts, which is the most important part of communication is the meaning. I always say to parents, let the speech therapist do the work where we pick on how they say that something and don't always make speech a chore in the home setting.
That's great advice. And I think too, it's hard, I think, for adults to have just natural speech when you're trying to think about every word. So for a child who's trying to think about not just the words, but then on top of that, where their tongue should be when they're making an L sound or a TH sound or an R sound, like that seems, that's stressful.
It is. And that's why, most good therapists will turn the situation into pretty systematic. Everything is research-based. We do work we call auditory bombardment, where we want the child or the person to hear the correct, and then we want them to measure that against the incorrect version. So we call that auditory discrimination. What sounds right? What doesn't sound right? And then really a lot of focus on the actual physical aspect, using models of the mouth and the tongue and using some tactile cues to help.
So are there things that we, though, can do at home as parents to support proper speech development?
Oh, yes. I feel like a huge skill set that's going away. And it makes me sad because it was big for me when I raised my sons was rhyme. But song and rhyme are very important skills. It actually helps kids single out sounds. You're attending to sounds. And of course, there's so many great things online or, we just have so much more with media now to access really good options for things like that. But reading to your child is the number one, and talking with your child. If people want to remember one sentence I say, it would be join in and narrate. For very young kids, we need to give them words. So we want to say, oh, you found it. There's a blue one. I'm holding the red one. Can you get it? And talking about what you're doing, like narrating it, but joining in with them, whatever they're doing, whether they're in the bathtub splashing or digging in the dirt. Limiting screen time is the American Speech Hearing Association has a stance on screen time. I'm not going to talk about numbers, what's okay and what isn't okay, but the less screen time, the better. We do know that there is a correlation between more screen time and more speech and language problems. Spending more time doing activities together, talking together, experiences.
What is the likelihood that a child will outgrow a speech disorder? Again, whether it's the just delayed speech in general or stuttering or those, sort of misplacing the sound of letters?
Very good. It's all a matter of providing a student with, or a child, a younger child with speech therapy. We know it's going to speed up the process. But of course, we all probably have bumped into people that are adults that clearly still have speech and language problems. And I feel badly when I know that maybe somebody missed out on an opportunity to correct something. I remember we bought a car not long ago at a dealership in Augusta, and the gentleman clearly had a speech and articulation error that, if he had focused on that, or somebody had provided those services when he was younger. We want people to focus, like I said, on what you're saying, not how you're saying something. Sometimes speech errors are just distracting to us, distracting to the listener. But I don't want parents to listen and say, oh, my three-year-old is not saying this word correctly or that word correctly. If you understand that child and you know their development is moving in the right direction, just an evaluation, don't get upset if you are denied services or told it's just developmental. That's good news.
Mm-hmm.
And then just go home and keep doing the modeling. We call it recasting. If somebody says something incorrectly, if your child mispronounces a word, you would just say it again in a louder, more clear voice.
And not necessarily have them follow your lead, but just that you're repeating the word in a proper way. That's right. That's a simple thing without creating that pressure. No, say it like me. You see what, right. You don't want to do that. Yep.
No, if they say I taked it, you say I took it, and then just keep moving on.
Yeah.
That one model.
Is there any way to prevent speech disorders in children? No. You're shaking your head. Yeah.
Like you described, your child doesn't have a disorder. He has a mild delay, I would say, based on what you said. A disorder is something that is definitely going to be with the person for quite a while, because we get caught up in the academic world where producing sounds correctly is necessary for what we do. And then it kind of slows everything down. And we do see missed opportunities for good socialization. Sometimes children don't want to share during show and tell, or avoid saying words because they know it's going to come out wrong. So I'm super concerned when I have a student that I would call disordered, not delayed, because I want to hit that need very hard with as much therapy as possible. Probably more than 2 sessions a week and during the school day. Like, that's what school therapists do. If your child has a need under the age of 5, Child Development Services provides free evaluations, or they can bill through Maine Care if that's, but there are resources to address the need before school, but they will always be screened at kindergarten screening. If there's something in the gray zone, like, oh, maybe, I understand them most of the time, but I'm not sure. That's part of every child's introduction to school, is being screened, and the speech and language screening would filter out whether something is warranting something that needs to be addressed.
So you talk delay versus disorder, kind of two different things. So a school is one place where you can kind of get that, let's take a look at this. But just for a parent, is there a trigger point where, okay, we need to bring in professional help here?
Truly, if your child's going to their physician every year for an annual, listening to their speech, talking about whether they can hear correctly, making sure, ruling out any hearing issues, things like that. Bring it up with your physician, and they will make a referral. You can look online for developmental milestones. That's pretty easy to find. We have a site for the American Speech Hearing Association, ASHA. If you want to talk to anyone in the state of Maine and just say, this is what my child is doing. I'm a member of the Maine Speech Hearing Association. I'm the secretary and have been for years. You went on our website, which is maineslp.org. You can steer your way to contact us, and you would be set up that same day with talking with somebody. So that's always an option. I just want to shout out to the Maine Speech Hearing Association that's what we are trying to do, is make the options more available for everybody, young and old, but also making sure that therapists are getting what they need as far as continuing education and so forth.
Margie, if there was one piece of advice for parents today, who might be worried or concerned, or just that instinct is popping up, what would that be? What's your one takeaway for parents today when it comes to this?
Right. I think if you have that gut feeling that maybe the child is not developing typically in any area of communication, start a little list, write down what you are hearing and aren't hearing, so that if your next step would be to talk to your physician, or you could skip that step and actually call an agency and say, I want an evaluation. You could certainly do that without the physician referral. But there are many private therapists, or you could call your school and get the local school if your child is underage and get some information from the therapist that works in the school. But write things down and ask questions and be prepared to look objectively at your child in terms of, not just speech sounds, but all aspects of communication. Are they paying attention with directions? Are they joining in with attention? We want to look at all aspects of interaction, because everything helps each other. It's a very complex web of things that you can't just fix one thing without having it have a ripple effect, or have a disorder in one part without having it somewhat impact other areas of communication.
Communication it's what we do. It is such an important part of life and such a great topic to talk about. Margie, I really appreciate your insight, your expertise, and your help today. I do want to mention that we'll have resources on this very topic on our website, which is wgme.com/raisingme. Margie, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great talking with you.
Such good information with Margie. And one of the biggest takeaways for me as a mom of a child who, I am telling you, he is as cute as they come, but is also at the age where I know the little lisp and the W's for L's and R's should, at least be starting to really work themselves out. But the takeaway is just not to correct them necessarily, really leave that to the professionals, and instead repeat back what they say properly as part of a conversation. My husband and I had recently started showing him how to properly make the L sound or the R sound like an SLP would. And just instinctually, I didn't really love that. But I also thought, well, aren't we supposed to teach? But also thought, could I be giving him a complex? The usual push-pull of parenting and not really sure what to do. But after the conversation with Margie, now we will say back to him, oh yeah, you're right. That is a little truck there, or whatever it might be, rather than trying to directly correct. Thank you so much to Margie for her passion and her expertise on the topic. And thank you for listening to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode is edited by Megan Littlefield and produced with Nate Eldridge. Please follow Raising Me wherever you get your podcasts, and consider a positive rating and review so others can find this message as well. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.